COVID-19 has thrust more than one crisis into our hands: the public health crisis, the economic crisis, the strategic crisis, and a cultural crisis. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson has been performing a wonderful service by recording conversations with some of the world's great thinkers about these interlocking challenges and streaming them on his website. John joins me now from his farm in New South Wales.
Thank you. Yes, no, and good to be with you as always, Nick. Always enjoy talking with you very much.
John, you wrote a thought-provoking piece, I thought, in The Australian recently on the erosion of the institution of fatherhood. Fatherless kids, it turns out, tend to grow up unstable and highly likely to commit crime.
We've known this for a long time, but the modern narrative is so averse to conversations about the importance of family structures in a traditional sense that it's sort of, it's taboo. You're not supposed to talk about these things, but the raw statistics speak for themselves. They are absolutely unbelievable. Around 85% of the American prison population is, and that population is overwhelmingly male. So that's point one. It's a male problem. Point two, staggeringly high numbers of jail inmates, as in around 85%, had an absent father or a father who was utterly hopeless at fathering and no decent father figure in their lives. And as the author of The Boy Crisis, himself a male feminist, not from the conservative end of the spectrum, in Warren Farrell, who co-wrote a book called The Boy Crisis with John Gray, who's famous for Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, two figures who are not right of centre. They argue that we need to realise very clearly that our boys are failing, they're in crisis, and when one sex is not doing well, neither sex is doing well. No one decries the fact that women are doing better than ever in terms of job markets and career prospects and indeed in pay in America. But we now have a serious problem with men, and the extraordinary predictor of a boy getting into crisis in his life is fatherlessness.
John, I find that supremely ironic when you delve into the aims of the Black Lives Matter movement, behind the veneer of social justice around race. You get to things like they want to see the decline of the traditional family. They see the traditional family as a bad thing, and part of their aim is to get rid of it. And yet, as you point out, the very reason so many black kids get into trouble, or at least an explanation for it, is the fact that they don't have fathers.
Well, Black Lives Matters plays fast and it really does play very fast and loose with the facts. And it's quite alarming. In many ways, it has to be seen as something that is motivated by an agenda that has little to do with the stated purposes because of the way in which they misuse figures. But actually, they've taken it down now, but there was in their stated aims and objectives was a clear reference to essentially winding back the nuclear family in favour of something called a sort of village family, where everybody piles in. If you really care about the facts and what is driving disadvantage and the number of blacks in trouble in America, you have to go to the issue of fatherlessness. But of course, it's not just blacks, it's all males. And there's the other great rub in terms of the numbers. You would think that police shootings of unarmed citizens in America was running at epidemic levels. In fact, over the last 10 years, there's been an average of about 55, 56 Americans shot annually who are unarmed by the police. And of that 55 or 56, around 14 or 15 have been black Americans. So, and then you come to the figures on how well black Americans are doing economically. One of the ironies is they've done better under Trump than they did under Obama. If America is such a racist place, by the way, how come it elected a black president? But he seemed to let black people down. That's a blunt reality. That's why they were not so keen on supporting him at the end. But you've got this reality that since the remarkable efforts of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, when maybe 30% of black African families in America were on middle class incomes, members of the middle class, that's about doubled. Now, there's still work to do. If black people were doing well, you wouldn't have had the protests for all of the work that Black Lives Matter have done in fomenting trouble. So there are issues. I don't want to deny that for a moment. But if you are sincere about solving the issues, first get your facts right so you know what you're dealing with and what the real problems are. And deconstructing the family even more will only exacerbate all the problems that Black Lives Matter so they're concerned about.
John, you recorded a remarkable interview with Victor Davis Hanson recently, who had some very interesting things to say about the inherently racist nature of Black Lives Matter. Let's just have a listen to that.
I think we have to be very careful because this is not a liberal movement. This is not a Marxist movement drawing on the traditions of even the Soviet Union. This is a weird, racial, angry movement, and it's deep down. It has an element of racism in it. It's getting more and more pronounced, and you can see the reaction of the progressive white liberal class in the United States. They feel that the crocodile is going to eat them last, but it's going to eat them.
It seems so self-evident, doesn't it, when it's explained as well as that, John? But why is it that we on the centre-right are so reluctant to get up and say those kind of things in public?
You know, I think it's in part because we're polite. It's in part because we're flabbergasted at the rate of change. It's in part because we tend to ascribe better motivation to people than perhaps some of the modern clarion callers and the people with the megaphones ascribe to the people around them. And it's partly because we just want to get on with our lives, but we don't have that luxury anymore. Our society's being pulled apart. And COVID-19 is, I see it as an acceleration of history. These trends were all there, but in many ways, it's really accelerating things. And one really does have to ask questions around, can we now restore some degree of normality? And I actually put it, to come to the end of that fascinating interview with that incredible man with such a powerful mind. If you're a middle American concerned about your country now, what would you do? He said, it's so late in the day that you can no longer be polite. I'm paraphrasing. You actually have to be prepared now to challenge the orthodoxies, to do the probing, to do the questions, and to say, no, right, this tears us apart. It's not building us up. If we continue down this road, we will lose the freedoms we cherish. The time has come when we really have to, I believe, with vigor, but with politeness and firmness and with reason, because shouting just plays into the enemy's hands, so to speak, in the great debates today. Push back and reclaim some territory, and particularly give those young people out there who, if I had $1 for every young person who said to me, I'm at university, I write essays now, just for the lecturers, because we don't believe for a moment most of their social theories and the stuff they're pushing on us, but we can't say what we think. Well, we unfortunately can't stay in that space anymore. We're going to have to particularly equip our rising generations to do what they're fully capable of doing, and I think by and large want to do, which is think clearly for themselves and break free of this cloying adventurism that's seeking to upturn all the norms of our society and replace it with a whole set of supposedly enlightened values upon which you simply cannot build a stable and a strong society, let alone one that can cope with the massive economic, and I'd have to say, military challenges that we now have to confront.
Yeah, because these things flow into one another, don't they? And I know you've spoken before, but let's hear you say it again. You fear, don't you, for our ability to stand up to these massive challenges on the strategic level, because we no longer believe in ourselves. We no longer understand ourselves. We don't have a shared understanding of what Australia is and what's worth defending.
I do. I love history. I find it amazing the little country of just 5 years old, back in about 1906-07, on a bipartisan basis, recognised that the world was becoming a very dangerous and unstable place, and that whilst they didn't know exactly what was coming, they ought to be prepared. So we went into the First World War. Just 5 years later, we had a Tier 2 Navy ordered, built and delivered in time for the First World War. We secured our part of the world and then went on to play a major role in the conflict that ensued, a heroic role which we're very proud of. Second World War, we were asleep at the wheel. We were unprepared. were unbelievably exposed to the Japanese. You read the history of submarine warfare. Now that's relevant. A staggering number of ships that were sunk around the Australian coast and our incapacity to do anything about it. We had submarines in the First World War. We didn't have any in the Second. And so we were trying to fight them with, busted down old aircraft out of the coasts and what have you, and hopefully rely on Americans and what have you. Cold War, we were ready. Because we were ready, because the West believed in itself, because we were strongly led, the Cold War ceased. And then we all went back to sleep again, as though somehow the world would be benign forever, the end of history. The Berlin Wall's come down, we can wind back, we can take a peace dividend, and everything will be all right. Well, we now see a world where there are several major trouble spots, any one of which could see some real adventurism, some real miscalculation, and then you don't know who else would pile on and in what sort of form. The government is now moving, I'm delighted to hear this, to do something serious about our fuel reserves. We can't defend ourselves, we can't feed ourselves, we can't do anything without decent oil reserves if something goes wrong. And they've announced a major expenditure increase in defence. That's very welcome. It means, apart from anything else, the Americans will take us seriously. One of the interesting things that Victor Davis Hanson said was that one thing we can rest assured of in Australia is that Trump admires and respects Australia hugely. It's an interesting thing, but we need to be respected and admired. And if we're not prepared to stand up for ourselves, why should we expect the Americans to automatically be there if something goes wrong?
But we need them. I mean, probably now more than any time, certainly since the Cold War, that alliance is important, and it's important that we can rely on the United States standing by us at a time like this. Given that, do you see any downside to the loss if Donald Trump was to lose this coming election?
It's a very interesting question, and I made the comment at a meeting recently that one of the things that distresses me is that the media in Australia does the Trump derangement syndrome stuff, hops on board with the American left of centre media in an assumption that there is nothing good to be said for Donald Trump at all. The responsibility of the Australian media is to carefully analyse where Australia's interests lie. And we shouldn't automatically assume that it lies in a Democrat administration that has always been soft on defence. Obama ran defence down terribly. He talked about red lines not being crossed and then did nothing when they were crossed. He did nothing about the South China Seas, and he dramatically reduced the preparedness of the American defence forces, including its Air Force. An insider in Washington told me that when Obama lost office, only around a third of America's warplanes were truly ready. Now, I can't verify that, but I really seemed a very trustworthy figure to me. And I think Australians would be astonished to know that. We've assumed we can rest under their mantle. Now, my simple point here is that in the reams of analysis that we get from Australian media and the willingness to play to the current sort of prevailing orthodoxy from CNN or whatever in the US, sees them failing to inform the Australian people that it's not as simple as that, and we need to think through just what the implications of a Trump win and a Biden win might really be for us, and whether in fact, frankly, the Democrats might be less committed to defence and to us than the current regime. Having said that, if there's one thing China's managed to do, it's unite the two sides of America on at least something, and that's that China can't be assumed to be benign anymore.
I think probably as recently as 2 presidential elections ago, I would have been looking to the mainstream media to get a fix on how this one's going, where the public is leaning. But I must admit I've given up on that. I mean, the mainstream media is probably the last place I'd go to get a handle on this election. How about you?
There are key writers still who I respect enormously who do give you good insights. And sometimes they're from left of centre too, but they're honest and they're professional. But overwhelmingly, what you're talking about has led so many people now to go online, online, I suppose is the word, and to look for information sources elsewhere. The great problem with that, there is a problem. It's a good thing in a way that it's accessible and you can find such unbelievable quality stuff now online. There are brilliant thinkers galore, brilliant analysts of galore. The one problem is it's a bit easy to get a feed, and the algorithms are set up so that it just reinforces your thinking, when it's always good for us to be challenged and to hear the other perspective. But the world has changed hugely. And one of the things that amazes me, I do have this conversation, a site that you've referred to, and we've been going just a bit over 2 years. 7 million, I think it is, YouTube downloads, and I don't know how many podcast listens. So there is a hunger for content out there. And the mainstream media, I think, flails around not recognising it's become its own worst enemy. They're all worried about the lack of income flow now because people are going online for investigative and quality journalism and so forth. So what do? They provide us not with more of it to win us back, but less of it, and create, even in the process, less trust and more wind back in their own influence.
Yeah, but I think as you point out, one of the great phenomenum of this COVID crisis has been the acceleration in what we might call alt media, if you like, not mainstream, not social, alt media. I suppose, in a sense, a bit of what we're doing now, and you've been doing for a couple of years. There is so much good content and good discussion going on now, and it's being well watched. I mean, I think I'm right in saying your Victor Davis Hanson interviews had 750,000 views already, right? I mean, that's more than twice as much as the 7:30 report on the ABC. This is one of the encouraging signs, isn't it, that free, intelligent discussion is still going on, and there's a tremendous demand for it.
Well, it is, and not all of the people who would have listened to that conversation are Australians, so it's probably a little unfair to compare to the ABC, but the numbers are extraordinary, and the thing that encourages me is the number of young people who come up and say, just so glad to get a range of views, please keep doing it, and I find that very encouraging. And I do think that, people are much smarter than we give them credit for. However, if you go on, with propaganda forever, we know this now in China. It's becoming obvious that appeals to nationalism are working in the Chinese community. It's only a little straw in the wind, but I had someone say the other day, an Australian working in China, I had a yoga class, and a number of ladies, and I used to enormously enjoy it, would come to my yoga classes, and recently they came and said, no, we've got to stop coming because you're from the West and we can no longer trust you. Now, this is a reflection of how the Chinese people, I think, we've seen this right throughout history. You spin a line consistently enough, if you can't get alternative views, people start to believe it. The West hasn't changed. It has, but in terms of its attitude towards China, it hasn't changed. China's attitude towards the rest of the world, maybe it hasn't changed, but we're really now seeing just how at odds it is with our understanding of how a liberal, rules-based global order should work.
That China, the big topic. If we were looking at the big picture, China has to be right front and centre in it. The news seems to get worse. The expulsion of 2 Australian journalists, this is just, we've moved so quickly on this. Do you think we could stabilise this relationship, or are we on a inevitable downward path?
I don't think I'm in a position to make an accurate prediction. All I can say is that they're not going to make it easy for us now, because they have a different view of us to the one that we have of ourselves. We see ourselves as a significant, mid-ranking nation, a beacon of light and hope, a place that people want to come to, a place that in many ways the rest of the world would like to emulate. They see us as a small country, in keeping with, this is one of the great problems. We don't study the great political philosophies anymore. So our own understanding of conservatism, of liberalism, of socialism have broken down. At the same time, as our universities, frankly, have not educated us properly to understand the other great streams of political thought, particularly communism. Now, the problem with communism is that, might is right, that the party is the arbiter of what's right and wrong. Your loyalties are owed to the party, not to your nation, not to your family, not to your community, but to the party. This is very alien to us. we I think very naively assumed that a communist was not necessarily a communist.
Perhaps the Cold War never ended, John.
So, look, this is a wealthy country. It's a country capable of ensuring that we could inflict, if you like, a great deal of pain on anybody who had any ill intent. That's quite capable, I think, of ensuring that we can look after our sea lanes, particularly in the context of relationships with similarly minded countries. I don't believe that China will be keen to give up the high quality and well-priced product that we are able to produce. Chinese consumers, for example, plainly love Australian food, and the iron ore that they buy from us, the transport costs are reasonable and what have you. It's high quality, the price is right. They say it's too high at the moment. Well, that's got to do with COVID in Brazil, not anything that Australia's done. So one hopes that common sense and self-interest will prevail. But as Lee Kuan Yew warned, nearly 20 years ago now, this was coming. It was always coming. We didn't listen to Lee Kuan Yew, but he told us, not just us, but the world. And he said, China won't have to intervene militarily. They'll just flex their economic muscle. And then the necessity will be for other countries to grip together and say, no, it's one in, all in. If you want to try and discriminate against one country, well, you'll find that that country will have support. And that's where we need to get to. And if there's one thing China's succeeded in doing with its extraordinarily bellicose public relations exercises in recent times, it's woken the world up big time.
Well, John, you've got a farm to run up there, you've got carbon to get into the soil and all those things we might talk about another time. But thank you again for your time and for your series, the John Anderson Conversations.
Nick, great to be with you, and all the best to anybody who picks up on this conversation.